As you know, our speaker is Jon Coupal. Jon is the president of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association. In addition, Jon has, in his past, has been the director of legal affairs for the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association, where he oversaw litigation and organization of litigation lobbying efforts. He is a recognized expert in California fiscal affairs and has argued numerous cases before the courts. Jon successfully defended, let me just give you a number of, Proposition 140, the state term limit initiative, before the Supreme Court. And in 1995, won a major ruling before the Supreme Court, which upheld the validity of Proposition 62, which was a Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association sponsored initiative that guaranteed the right to vote on local taxes. He's also a principal drafter of Proposition 218, the Right to Vote on Taxes Act, a measure passed by voters in 1996. He served as chair of the initiative campaigns representing interests in taxpayers, including the campaign against Prop 88, Proposition 88, a parcel tax initiative, and successfully defeated Proposition 1A by voters in 2009. He served on the Arnold Schwarzenegger transition team. He is the chairman of the foundation, Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Foundation, that provides funding for taxpayer rights, litigation, and educational studies. He has a weekly column in numerous newspapers, and he has a television and radio program that discuss fiscal policy and political issues. Mr. Coupal graduated from Marshall White School of Law, College of William and Mary, where he obtained his Juris Doctorate. And after law school, he was an attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation for 9 years, specializing in tax and political law. Would you please welcome Jon Coupal.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. We've got a little bit of ground to cover here. You know, this is, when you're talking about fire safety, this is a little bit of a bugaboo for me, because even though I live in the city limits of Sacramento and have very little fire risk, I love to hike, and one of my favorite hikes is up to the Desolation Peak, where you park off 50, and then when you hike up, it's about a 4,000 mile climb over 3 miles. It's pretty steep. I'm not sure I could do it right now, but when you're hiking, you look at how poorly the forest has been managed, and it is so frustrating. I've talked to some of the firefighters with CAL FIRE. They feel the same way. Everybody feels the same way, and we're probably all frustrated that things can't get done, even though we know what the problem is. So we've identified the problem, and then we trip all over ourselves, or at least the politicians do, trying to deal with it. And how is this so much like every aspect of California? Whether it's homelessness, taxation, transportation, high-speed rail, I mean, it's just, we live in a dysfunctional state, and it is extremely frustrating, particularly for those of us who were not native. I came here in 1982, and I love it here. I would really like to stay. But over and over again, I see my friends leaving for Montana, Idaho, Texas, Arizona. People are bailing out of this state in very large numbers, and the people that we're losing are our most productive and well-educated people. That's not a recipe for success. But anyway, we do have an opportunity to push back a little bit. Most of you know the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. We were formed by the legendary Howard Jarvis. If you ever seen the movie Airplane, he was in that. Believe it or not, he had a cameo in that. But Howard Jarvis was a very tenacious individual. He tried 5 times to get property tax relief in California and failed 5 times. And then in 1978, he partnered with Paul Gann and put Proposition 13 on the ballot, and the rest is history. What's most notable about Proposition 13 is that every institution was opposed to it. Every single editorial board, every single education group, every business group, including the Chamber of Commerce, all the business groups opposed it. The only institution other than the HJTA that supported it was the Farm Bureau. But other than that, everybody was against it, and it passed by 66%. So that is a reflection of the fact that, like today, there is a huge disconnect between our political leaders and ordinary people. And I think that is reflective of not only California, but at the national level as well. People can understand why people are so upset, and the political left, is their heads are exploding at the very thought that Donald Trump might win. Whether you like Donald Trump or not, I think he probably will win. The polling is closing a little bit closer at the national level, but in the swing states where it really matters, it looks like he's got a really good shot. So again, whether you like him or not, we cannot stand another 4 years of what we've experienced because the nation is in real peril. The Proposition 13, that's what we're known for. We exist to protect Proposition 13, and we exist as the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, but we also have a 501c3 foundation, contributions to which are tax deductible, I might add. But that does our litigation and our education. I'm going to talk about litigation in a moment. But we also have a political action committee. We have 2 initiative committees, one called Protect Prop 13 and another known as Taxes Committee. These are registered initiative committees with the Secretary of State. And we also have a political action committee. So we try to advance the interests of taxpayers in every single forum that's available to us, including the forum of media and the public forum, which is why I do the column and why we have the radio show. Our VP of Communications in Los Angeles is Susan Shelley. You may have seen some of her columns. She is a dynamo and really covers the Southern California area with, she will never turn down a meeting. She'll go to every single conservative group, editorial board. She also sits on the editorial board of the Orange County Register, which is a big help to us. So we have offices in Sacramento and Los Angeles. We try to cover as much as we can, but we are outgunned, as you all know, by the interests that favor more government spending and more government involvement in our lives. Prop 13 did something that most of you know pretty well. It took an average property tax rate of 2.6% and cut it by more than half, 1%. I hope you all save your property tax bills year over year, because that's the best way to see how Proposition 13 has helped you. There's a lot of add-ons onto your property tax bill, but your core property tax rate is 1% of value, and that value can only go up 2% per year. And so this is the best way we can enforce Proposition 13, is to watch how your property taxes go up. So I'm primarily here today to talk about the Taxpayer Protection and Government Accountability Act. As was just mentioned, we've been involved in so many initiatives. We did Prop 62, Prop 218, Prop 26 that tried to bring clarity between what is a fee and a tax. And this has been an ongoing 44-year war with the tax and spend interest. We provide taxpayer protection, and then they try to find loopholes, and they do. And they have a very compliant media, they have a compliant legislative body, and now, regrettably, more often they have a compliant court. The California judiciary has trended extremely to the left side of the political spectrum. We no longer have any appointees from George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan or Pete Wilson. They're all either Jerry Brown appointees or Gavin Newsom appointees, and that leads to a very hostile judiciary. Having said that, there are some very progressive judges who are very, very fair. I have appeared before some of them, and they recognize that the true role of the judiciary is to call balls and strikes and not make policy. And it's refreshing to see that when I appear before a court, when I know that the judge is politically very liberal, but they will rule on the law. And I'm going to talk about a particular case coming up. The Taxpayer Protection Act and Government Accountability Act is scheduled for the November ballot. It is a duly qualified initiative. It was not easy getting it qualified during COVID. It was expensive. It was about $16 million to get it qualified. And that's not even the campaign that we're facing in November, which will be like the split roll campaign, probably $70 million on each side. This is going to be World War III between the tax and spend interests, mostly public sector labor organizations, and the taxpayer interests. We are very happy to be partnered with the business community in the state of California for this. Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association could not do this on its own. The business community, particularly the California Business Roundtable, has stepped up. And we've not always agreed with the California Business Roundtable or the California Chamber of Commerce, because sometimes they go along to get along. But I believe we have reached a point now where the business community, whether it's small business, NFIB, Americans for Prosperity, Job Creators Network, or mid-size business groups like local chambers, statewide business groups, I think they've all had enough. They've had enough. I mean, how far more do we have to compromise with tax and spend progressives because they're taking everything we've got and they're eroding property rights and they're imposing very draconian regulations on us. The Taxpayer Protection Act, interestingly enough, is not as impactful as Proposition 13. Proposition 13 cut property taxes by more than half and imposed very strict limits on the imposition of local taxes, whether those are general taxes or special taxes, and imposed a 2/3 vote requirement for statewide taxes that had to be passed by a 2/3 vote of each house of the California legislature. That's what Prop 13, very, very impactful taxpayer protection. As much as I love the Taxpayer Protection Act, and I believe it is critical for the survival of the state of California, it doesn't cut any tax. What it does do is it provides limitations on the imposition of taxation. It provides unparalleled transparency and accountability. And it does have one substantive provision that's not in existence right now, and that is, I just mentioned that right now it takes a 2/3 vote of each house to impose a statewide tax. For at least 35 years, that was not needed because we had at least some Republicans in the legislature. Now the Democrats have, and by the way, we're nonpartisan. A third of my members are Democrats. I want to hasten to add that, but we just believe in fiscal responsibility. The progressives, let's say that the progressives have a more than 2/3 vote of each house, so they are able to jam through statewide tax increases with very little resistance, and they've done so. And the most unpopular of those statewide taxes that have been imposed in recent years is the gas tax. They did that through the legislature. That was not on the ballot. We tried to repeal it with a ballot measure, but a very deceptive campaign. We came close but didn't put it across the finish line. But one of the new provisions of the Taxpayer Protection Act is that in addition to the 2/3 vote of the California legislature to impose a statewide tax, you have to submit it to the voters in a statewide vote. Simple majority, not 2/3, but you have to submit it to the voters. I guarantee you the gas tax, had it been presented to the voters after being passed by the California legislature, it would have crashed and burned. Nobody doubts that. So we're giving that additional protection of a vote, a statewide vote on statewide taxes. I mentioned how progressive the judiciary has become. One of those decisions was the infamous Upland decision. It was California Cannabis Coalition versus City of Upland, where the California Supreme Court did not rule weakening the 2/3 vote, but they implied it, and the lower courts exploited it. What they said was that the 2/3 vote requirement for a local special tax did not apply to a local special tax that was put on the ballot by a local initiative, which opened the floodgates to special interests, again, mostly public sector labor, to come in and propose a citizens initiative frequently supported by the city council or the board of supervisors. So it's kind of citizens initiative in name only, but they've jammed through all these simple majority special taxes, and that is a real threat. We've seen some major, huge tax increases in California. The biggest one was in Los Angeles called the ULA tax. It was a huge tax. It was a real estate transfer tax of up to 5% on all real estate transactions, and that froze the commercial real estate market in Los Angeles as they tried to negotiate that. We've got, we sued on that, and we've got a fairly good legal case on it, not because of Prop 13, but because of a unique provision of the LA City Charter. We can win that, but if the Taxpayer Protection Act passes, we call those upland taxes, and there are only about 8 of them right now. Those would have to be resubmitted. They would not go away. They would have to be resubmitted to the voters for ratification. So some of these were like commercial partial taxes. There were some other taxes, a vacant property tax. Some of these passed with simple majority vote. They wouldn't have passed with the 2/3 vote that Prop 13 mandates. Remember, the 2/3 vote for special tax has been the California law for 44 years. It was this ambiguity created by the California Supreme Court that threw that into turmoil. So we're going to reverse that. So we've got the voter approval of statewide taxes. We've got closing the upland loophole, and we also eliminate hidden fees by unelected bureaucrats. Many times, the legislature, board of supervisors, or the city council will say, well, we didn't raise that fee, this administrative agency did, Air Resources Control Board, local reclamation district, or something, an administrative agency created by a government entity imposes the fee, and the elected body washes their hands of the whole thing. We say, no, you can propose a fee, the administrative agency can propose a fee, but it has to be approved by a elected legislative body, either the California legislature or the board of supervisors or a city council or even an elected reclamation district. As long as there's an accountable body that approves a fee increase or a tax increase, it'll be okay. And most of them do that now, but what we don't want, and the problem we're trying to correct, is making sure that there's direct political accountability for any increase in any exaction, fee, charge, tax, or assessment, that you know who did it. You know who did it. So that is I think a huge protection. The other thing we do is, and we've tried to do this before, we did it successfully with Proposition 218 as it relates to property-related fees, trying to impose a requirement that the fee reflect only the cost of the service being provided. But we bring this statewide to all fees, local and state fees, to make sure that we impose a requirement that the fee be limited to the actual cost of the service being provided or the direct cost of the regulation being administered. So what we don't want, and we've seen this, we've seen like a rental housing inspection fee. They impose a fee on every single apartment door, and they never come and inspect the property. They use it as a slush fund for the general fund. So what we say is, if you're going to impose a fee, it can only be used for providing service, like going to a county park. You pay a daily use fee. Nobody objects to that. Nobody objects to that. So we're bringing some clarity there. Let me give you another example. The ag community does not mind paying pesticide fees because those funds are segregated and they're used to enforce the pesticide regulation program. But that money's not being funneled to the state's general fund, at least not yet. So there are a lot of fees out there that are legitimate. We're not saying don't do it. We're saying that if there's a like a benefit assessment or some other non-tax related exaction, you've got to limit it to the cost of service. And if there's litigation over the reasonableness of that fee, the burden of proof is on the government. Because we go into court usually, and we have the burden of proof of showing that it is not reasonable. We flip the table, we put the Constitution, that the government has the burden of proof of showing that a fee is reasonable. The other thing we do is, and this is another problem that people recognize this and they want it addressed. The ballot label on any tax increase, the ballot label is often obscure and does not explain that this is a tax. So we put in the Constitution that if there is a tax increase or a fee increase on the ballot, it has to say so. And it has to say what the tax is, the amount, the duration, and the amount of revenue sought to be raised. So again, for ballot measures that people vote on, there are a lot of things that the local governments have to put on the ballot. You get truth in advertising when it comes to tax increases. So these provisions, we did polling and focus groups on all these elements of the Taxpayer Protection Act. And the right to vote on statewide tax increases polls at about 88%. The transparency provisions polls in the 80s. All the elements of the Taxpayer Protection Act poll very high. Tells us that if we have the resources to run a campaign, it will pass. And our adversaries have done the same. We know they've done the same polling we have, and they are scared to death. The California League of Cities is out there saying all kinds of things that are not true about this. It's the end of Western civilization. This is the same thing. This is the same thing we heard about Proposition 13. You know, in Prop 13 they had this University of California economist, a very academic-looking guy, looking straight at the camera, saying, "If Proposition 13 passes, California will be plunged into a recession." Well, Prop 13 passed and California's economy just took off like a rocket. You know, we've heard the lies before, and we're hearing them again. And I really don't think it's going to work, because I think people now are so distrustful of what they're being told by government. Case in point, Proposition 1, it was just on the ballot, that barely squeaked by. We opposed it because we didn't think it was a proper use of bond funding. Okay, it was for homelessness and mental health services. And by the way, the way it was structured was horrible. But we thought it was going to, we did not spend any money against it, because we thought, okay, Governor Newsom has $25 million to run a campaign. He's got everybody behind it barely passed. And that told me, number one, I should have spent a little bit of money trying to oppose it. But the fact that it barely passed, people are looking at this and they're going, "You've spent $150 billion, whatever, on homelessness, and the problem keeps getting worse. What is wrong with you people?" So there's this people are really waking up to the fact that their dollars are not being used well. It's not that people are unsympathetic with the homeless. It is a real crisis. It's a mental health crisis. We understand that. But our adversaries are loaded for bear. They're coming after us. And I'll wrap up with telling you the last thing they did is that Governor Newsom and the California legislature filed a lawsuit to take the Taxpayer Protection Act off the ballot. And they filed it directly in the California Supreme Court, bypassing all the lower courts. I don't think they will win. We looked at that, we thought, what are you doing? Number one, you're giving us a heck of a lot of PR, because these are the same people that want to protect democracy, and now they're trying to prevent you from voting on the Taxpayer Protection Act. Their legal argument is extraordinarily weak. Their legal argument is that the Taxpayer Protection Act fundamentally changes government in such a dramatic way that it is really not just an amendment to the Constitution, it is an impermissible revision of the whole Constitution. It is no such thing. Proposition 13 survived a legal attack based on the revision theory, and Prop 13 is far was far more impactful than the Taxpayer Protection Act. As I said, most of what the Taxpayer Protection Act does is procedural and has to do with transparency and accountability.
So before we take any questions,
Sure.
there were so many things in this act.
Yes.
Just summarize, just hit them as a bullet, could you? I noted them,
Sure. A right to vote on all statewide taxes, okay? Transparency, a prohibition against administrative agencies from imposing fees without legislative approval. It means any exaction has to be approved by a legislative body. Ballot label transparency, and the other one was, legally binding description, oh yeah, the cost of service requirements, cost of service. So those, and you can go to our website at,
it's, I took it down. You can either go to hjta.org, which is on your agenda, and taxpayerprotection.com, no spaces, taxpayerprotection.com.
and if you want, that is the website you just mentioned, was the website of the broader campaign. I'm one of 3 individuals on that executive committee, but HJTA has its own website called the Taxpayer Protection, called the Right to Vote on Taxes.
Okay.
Go to either one, it's the same material.
Right to vote on taxes?
Yeah, righttovoteontaxes.com.
Okay. I'm gonna let you ask, or answer.
I'll be happy to, yes.
Thank you for speaking. It sounds like the Howard Jarvis Association is very much involved at the state level. Do you get involved in local levels at all, or is it predominantly focused?
Yes, we do. Obviously, we can't get involved in every local issue, but most of our litigation's at the local level. We represent a number of local taxpayer groups, and we analyze issues under Prop 218, whether there's been a deprivation of the right to vote on a tax. But most of our clients come from local governments. We do. Now, what we do is Prop 13 and our statewide initiatives provides the framework to help our locals, but our locals, and we don't have charters, we have partners, but we don't have chapters, local chapters. But we do a lot of, most of what we do is in conjunction with local taxpayer groups. Sacramento's Taxpayers League, LA Taxpayers, Kern County Taxpayers, and local land use groups as well.
And just a quick follow-on.
Yes. I think we've represented you guys in some litigation before. I can't remember.
Okay, so understand no charters. Are we affiliated with Howard Jarvis in any way, shape, or form, or what? I'd be interested to understand.
Not
Okay.
formally, but a lot of people in this room are probably members of ours, so we appreciate that.
Okay,
So
thank you.
please, and membership dues are $15 a year, so.
Let's go around from this side.
Sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I'm responsible for the online mailbox too, so I've got a couple, one is mine, one is theirs, so I'm gonna start with theirs. This question came in from Sue Taylor, and she is asking kind of a question about Prop 13. So Prop 13 obviously allows the rate to go up by 2% every year.
Right.
So her question is one that I actually hadn't thought of before, but is that a mandatory increase, or could the Board of Supervisors, if they so chose, decide, hey, we're just not gonna do any reassessments this year?
The 2% is based on a figure from either the State Controller's Office, the Department of Finance, I can't remember. But because there have been a couple of years when inflation was actually below 2%, and so the actual increase in your property tax went up like 1.85%. Everybody takes it, it is imposed, but keep in mind, if a county doesn't take it, there'll be some other special district that gets some property tax revenue. And say, hey, if you don't want your little bit, we'll go ahead and take it. So the reality is, it does go up. Interestingly enough, a big political fight that we hear all the time is, Sacramento steals our property tax revenue. They're always grabbing our money. The reality is they don't. They really don't. Your property tax revenues stay local, but what the state does is the state allocates the apportionment of property tax revenue. And so when the state gets in trouble, it has an obligation to fund education, K through 12, K through 14. It will redirect more money to go to K-12 and take away from cities, counties, and special districts. That's how Sacramento steals your money, even though the money ostensibly stays local. I don't think any, I could be wrong, but I don't believe any property tax dollars actually go to Sacramento. But it's reapportioned, reallocated.
And so then my question was on a different subject, but related to the Taxpayer Protection Initiative, which, by the way, I think we endorsed all the way back in 2022 when it was first circulated.
Right.
But we've seen a lot of, and I don't, not necessarily here in El Dorado County, but statewide, as I'm sure you have as well, but cities, special districts, really, I would argue, campaigning against the measure. Can you just help us to kind of identify what we should look out for in terms of what local governments are and are not allowed to do with respect to telling their residents how to vote on a ballot measure?
That is a huge issue. This is what we call the Stanson issue, named for Stanson versus Mott, where there was a case that said it is illegal for government entities to use public monies for electioneering. Now, they are permitted to engage in informational activity, but what is informational versus advocacy? It's a gray area. Now, we just hired a new attorney a couple months ago, and she is going to oversee our public integrity project, which a large part of it is monitoring municipal entities in the counties and statewide organizations to make sure that taxpayer dollars are not used for political activity. Funny you should ask that. The League of Cities is in town in Sacramento today, and they're having a rally at the steps of the Capitol to oppose the Taxpayer Protection Act. We're gonna try to do some investigation to see if they're using any public funds to hold this rally. Now, the city council members are in town for the League of Cities meeting, but if they're using taxpayer dollars to create posters or something that's anti-Taxpayer Protection Act, that's a violation of law. So we've sued them successfully. In fact, we sued the county of LA, and we did it in conjunction with the Fair Political Practices Commission. Because we brought the issue to the Fair Political Practices Commission, they imposed a $1.3 million fine on the county of LA, and we got to split the money with them. So we used that revenue to set up a project to go after government entities that spend money for political advocacy. They cannot do it. And so here's the test. If you get something in the mail and it says paid for by, and it's got a committee number, it says Friends of the City of Roseville or something like that, that's probably legal. But if that doesn't have a FPPC disclosure and it's from the city, you might want to give us a heads up. Now keep in mind, elected officials can take a position on ballot measures. So you're going to see a lot of public officials take a position in opposition to the Taxpayer Protection Act, but you're also going to see a lot of local government officials support the Taxpayer Protection Act.
And what you mean by that is individually?
Individually, but they can't spend taxpayer money.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Let's
very
go
much.
round of applause.